to take the unprecedented step a couple of weeks ago of stating publicly that they weren't going to do it any longer. Just yesterday, the German representative on the European Central Bank resigned for personal reasons, but thought to be because he disagrees with what's going on with the Europe debt crisis. The seventh issue I want to raise is the state debt. You've been reading about that as well. Many of our U.S. states are technically bankrupt. The government, our federal government, can't bail those states out without adding to their own debt. The eighth issue I want to bring up is the U.S. government asset liability mismatch. 40% of U.S. government debt has been financed with short-term loans and must be refinanced within a short period of time, 18 months primarily. Now that debt was primarily financed with U.S. Treasury bonds at less than 1% interest. If the Fed feels forced to raise interest rates, what does that do? It increases our debt significantly. If they keep interest rates low, as Ben Bernanke has promised to do, it creates even more of a credit bubble. Either way, it's a conundrum we can't get out of. The ninth issue I want to bring up is U.S. government spending. What do we know about that? Well, we know that so far, whether it's a Republican or Democrat Congress, they have been unwilling, not unable, but unwilling to do what they need to do to reduce our spending and address our huge, overwhelming, and insolvent entitlement programs and military spending. We currently finance most of the world's defense. The official national debt at $15 trillion is dwarfed by the real debt, estimated anywhere to be from $130 trillion to $200 trillion using common GAAP accounting that public companies in the U.S. are required to use. Now, the 10th issue I want to talk to you about is the world economy. The biggest problem we have relating to these issues is that the entire world economy's GDP is only $50 trillion. In other words, there's not enough productive assets in the world to bail us out of our real debt. My fellow Americans, this is a symptom of what ails us. I believe that when we look back at this period over through the lens of history, we will say that the problems didn't occur in the last 2 years with the Obama administration. They didn't even occur in the last 12 years, starting with the Bush administration. We'll look back at the implementation and design of the Federal Reserve in the early 1900s. We'll look at the Social Security program that was implemented by FDR in the 1930s. We'll look at the addition to the welfare state with the Medicare program in the 1960s. We'll look at the 1970s when Richard Nixon took us off the gold standard. We'll look at the 1990s with the rampant spending that occurred during the George W. Bush years. And I'm not talking about defense spending. I'm not talking about military spending, which are two different things. I'm talking about the growth of the welfare state. I want to go back to close my comments with the adjectives that I used earlier to describe America. Ingenuity, individualism, respect for individual rights and differences, the great melting pot, a rich history of civic and religious organizations who take care of each other, a generous nation, people bound by a desire to participate in the land of opportunity. We, the people, are at a crossroads in our history. We may or may not be able to get out of our economic crisis, but frankly, I don't think that's the biggest problem we have. What we need to do is start over if and when we hit an economic crisis in this country. We need to remember what we are. We need to remember the characteristics that define us. We need to remember that we are Americans. And we can live and survive and prosper through an economic crisis. What we cannot do is lose our liberty.